All right, well, welcome to our reprise of the future of digital measurement infrastructure. My name is Gary Angel. I'm going to be your presenter today. I'm going to be joined in the second half of the presentation by James Perkins from Shop Direct. A couple quick notes on the webinar today. As with most webinars, we are recording this, and if you signed up, as if you're hearing these words, you must have, you will get an email in the next day or two with a link to the webinar. I'm assuming most of you probably won't want to re-listen to it, but if you want to pass it on to people, it will be available. And if you have to drop out for any part of the presentation, be assured it is being recorded. I mentioned that this is a reprise. This is a little bit unusual in that James and I were on earlier this morning doing this webinar for a UK and European audience. So this is the US time version, and this morning he had it good because it was late afternoon for him, but crack of dawn for me. And right now I have it good because it's the middle of the morning for me and kind of really late in the evening, or at least getting into the evening for him. I just wanted to get started on the webinar by talking just a little bit about myself and giving you a sense of my background and how I come to this topic. I think that's pretty important, actually. I'm the president and one of the co-founders to Semphonic. Semphonic is a digital measurement consultancy. We've been working in web and digital analytics for the last 14 years. And prior to that, I spent another decade plus working in database marketing with what passed for in those days, big data analytics. One thing that I've learned over the last 20-plus years of experience in this industry is how important it is to really understand the directions you're taking with technology. Technology drives almost everything we do, and so often we make decisions about technology that look good in the short run but turn out over the long run maybe not to be the best path. And a lot of things I'm going to be talking about in today's webinar really get to that. We do a lot of enterprise measurement for a lot of big enterprises. And right now, the state of enterprise measurement is really in a state of what I would describe as considerable flux and change. And what I wanted to do in today's webinar was just sort of walk through an overview of what I see the state of digital enterprise measurement to be. Talk a little bit then about some of what really is the heart of this webinar, the way you source data to a warehouse if, like many enterprises, you either are or are thinking about investing in an analytics warehouse. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Celebris solution as a way to do that. And then I'm going to bring on James from Shop Direct. I'm going to talk about their experiences with Celebris so that people can get a feel for how one really large organization has handled the problem of sourcing data into the warehouse. So I'm going to start with the state of enterprise measurement. And I think that while in many, many, many respects the state of enterprise digital measurement has improved dramatically in the last decade, there are still some things about it that I think are frustrating to people like myself and to many of the people I talk to in the enterprise measurement community. If you think about the problem that web analytics vendors are faced with, they get a truly stunning, almost unimaginable amount of data. Individual websites spin out vast amounts of data, but when you're dealing with thousands of them and then you have to provide near real-time reporting back to people, the challenges are legitimately enormous. And I think that the web analytics vendors have made considerable strides in developing solutions that really meet reporting needs around digital measurement. On the other hand, there are a lot of holes, and I think the challenges of how much data that web analytics vendors have to process and provide has in many respects led to an approach that I kind of call the least common denominator approach to analytics. If you look at what you get in a web analytics tool as an organization, there are some things that are really obviously missing. And some of the things that really stand out to me is that for most web analytics tools, there's really no such thing as customer level analysis. I believe that most organizations these days are thinking about, talking about, and really wanting to make a pretty fundamental switch in their digital analytics from website page-based analytics to customer analytics. That's extraordinarily difficult to do with the tool set we have in hand. There's no statistical modeling in most web analytics tools. And going back to my experiences in database marketing, 15 or 20 years ago, we were building models about how customers behaved, and we were able to predict how they would behave, how they would likely behave, at least, in response to different marketing strategies. That's virtually non-existent in the digital marketing realm. Data-driven segmentation. I'm a big believer that if you want to talk effectively to your customers, it's vitally important to understand who they are. You're never going to do that on a one-to-one basis if you're a large business. Segmentation is the key to that. Segmentation is the key to relevancy. Segmentation drives almost every interesting aspect of analytics. And the most important kind of segmentation, in my view, is data-driven segmentation. Segmentation that emerges out of the actual behavior of customers on the website. Well, that isn't available in web analytics tools. There's virtually no statistical analysis capability in most web analytics tools. Even things as basic as correlations really aren't available. That's kind of startling. You know, if you're an analyst, if you're a business intelligence analyst and you come to digital measurement, often one of the first reactions is, oh my gosh, is that all these tools provide? Many of the core things that we would think of as analysis capabilities are missing and look to remain missing for some considerable amount of time into the future. There's no integration of customer data. And you know, that may be a bit of an overstatement, I guess, as I look at this bullet point. You certainly can't integrate customer data into most web analytics tools, but there are a lot of challenges. Most enterprises don't want to move their customer data outside their firewall. It's hard to do. But even beyond that, I think that this next bullet point really gets to some of the challenges. Web analytics tools tend to be good at one thing, looking at web data. They tend to be very poor when it comes to looking at other types of data. So even if you wanted to move your customer data over, and even if you could move your customer data over, and in many cases you're just not allowed to do that, you'd find that probably you wouldn't get much out of it because the software that front ends web analytics tools isn't really built to look at other kinds of data and doesn't provide the kind of flexibility you need to look at different data types and different styles of data. So there are some real limitations in what web analytics tools provide, and I think that's a pretty significant factor in the marketplace today. You know, there's another big trend, I think, happening right now around digital measurement that's really worth talking about. 4 or 5 years ago, maybe even a little longer than that, there was a major revolution in our industry as people moved from log file processing to tagging. This was a huge leap forward. I date back to the days when all web analytics was done with log file processing, and it was a challenge. Logs are really, really messy. They really aren't intended for analytics. They're really intended for IT performance monitoring. So to take those server logs and use them for customer analysis was always, always a very, very challenging thing to do. And it remains challenging to this day. Tags were a night and day improvement. Tags gave access to the data in a much easier fashion and gave access to a much, much cleaner data stream. That being said, I think the broad enterprise experience with tagging has been a little more challenging than I think a lot of us thought it was going to be when we first started down this path. I think a couple things are driving that. First of all, as web analytics solutions have grown in complexity and ability to customize, the amount of customization that you have to do in the tag has steadily increased. This is a real challenge. Tagging customization is cumbersome and kind of difficult. I think most organizations are realizing they're spending a lot more on tagging than they ever thought they would, and it's still oftentimes not enough. And that really gets to the second challenge. Governance around tagging has proven to be a lot harder than was originally expected. There's a couple reasons for that, including that increasing level of complexity. But here's another one. With tagging systems, they're designed so that you have to figure out what you want to measure before you deploy the tag. In other words, when you put your measurement infrastructure out, you better have made the right decisions about what kinds of things are going to be of interest to people. That's very challenging. I can tell you we've done countless, hundreds and hundreds of web analytics implementations for clients across the globe and on huge scales. Despite that experience, it's almost impossible for us to always be right about what a client is going to need when they actually sit down and start using the information. But tagging puts the burden on you to do that, because if you don't collect the information in the tag, it's gone. It's missing. There's no way to resuscitate it. That's a real challenge in tagging, and that burden that organizations have to get the tag right, I think, really colors the whole web analytics implementation process. The third thing, and maybe this is the least significant point on this page, but I still think it's important to a lot of enterprises, just because tags have proven to be a pretty challenging thing to do, and because every vendor has their own distinct tagging set, when you deploy tagging, it ties you pretty closely to a specific web analytics vendor. It creates a lot of friction. I know right now there's a lot of interest in the marketplace in tag management solutions, which, by the way, I think are fantastic. We definitely prefer to do implementations in tag management solutions. One of the reasons for that interest, though, I think, is that a lot of enterprises are interested in abstracting the infrastructure from the analytics tool. They want to be able to work with different vendors. They want to at least have the independence to do that without a really prohibitive change. But right now, for most people, tagging ties you very closely to a specific web analytics solution. I think that probably the biggest direction right now in enterprise analytics, and it's really at the heart of the topic that I'm going to talk about today, is the evolving role of the data warehouse. I was astonished last year at our Exchange conference by how many large enterprises were suddenly, and really for the first time, serious about taking web behavioral information and integrating it into a larger analytics mart with customer data. That's something that people have been talking about in our industry for many years, but all of a sudden, lots of people were actually doing it. And I think there's a lot of reasons that are really driving this trend. A lot of the limitations that I talked about in terms of web analytics tools are solved when you move data into an analytics warehouse. You get tools that provide advanced analysis and modeling. You get access to customer-level data. I think that's critical. You get integration and support for different types of data. You know, data warehouses are very flexible in the way they can take data in, and they give you a lot of opportunities to massage and tune that data so that you can look at it the way you need to look at that particular kind of data. They give you advanced automation capabilities for production systems. And web analytics tools are great for democratizing data, but in fact, they don't actually work all that well if you need to churn out and push reports to hundreds or even thousands of users. Well, you can support that application out of the warehouse, and we certainly have clients who have gone to a warehouse to do that kind of thing. And finally, the warehouse provides integration of outbound data into web services and other outbound programs. You know, the whole point of getting data is to use data. And once you start using analytics data, it turns into segmentation and targeting that you need to move out to your outbound email systems and your website. That can be extremely challenging to do from a web analytics solution. The warehouse gives you, at least in theory, because this is pretty challenging, the capability to do that. So if data warehousing is the future of enterprise analytics, I think there are two big questions that need to be answered at pretty much every enterprise. First off is, where does that leave traditional web analytics tools? And we see organizations coming up with a range of different answers here, and I think this is going to evolve over time. You know, a fair number of our clients look at this problem and say, I want to keep my web analytics solution so I have easy democratization of the data so that people can get at those basic web behavioral questions really easily, because that can be difficult to do out of the data warehouse. Other people are looking at it and saying, you know what, if the interesting information is going to be at the customer level, if to really get at the numbers I want and report on the kinds of metrics I need that really drive my business, if that's going to be in the warehouse, maybe there isn't much of a role for that web analytics tool. And maybe what I need to think about is how I can move my reporting and my analysis fully into the warehouse. The decision you make about the role of the web analytics tool once you start investing in a warehouse is going to have a pretty big impact on the way you think about infrastructure. And we'll talk about that as I delve down into the second question, which is, okay, if you're going to build yourself an analytics warehouse, how do you get the data into the warehouse? And that's really, I suppose, that the ultimate theme of this webinar today is sourcing data into the warehouse and some of the challenges and opportunities around that. Well, you're not without options when you think about sourcing data in the warehouse. In fact, I think people might be surprised to see a list this long when they think about ways to get data into an analytics mart. The first option here, data feeds from an existing tag vendor. So if you have Omniture, if you have Coremetrics, if you have Web Trends, getting a data feed from one of those vendors is by far and away the most common way to source data into the warehouse. There are some pretty good reasons for that, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide. So this is what we see most clients doing. But there are some other options. Log processing. I mentioned some of the challenges with logs. Boy, they are a dirty source of data, and they take some real work. But they do provide you with a detailed record of what happened on the website, at least server side on the website. And we have clients that are serving the warehouse and feeding the warehouse from logs. So it is at least an option. Universal tag. I mentioned that I'm really a big advocate of tag management systems. They really do provide a different level of governance around tagging. There are a number of vendors in this space, Insighton, Tagman, Telium, Satellite. Some of these vendors will also provide you a feed from their system. So Telium, for instance, you can set it up so that not only do you pop an image request off to a web analytics vendor, but you can send it to yourself. That creates a really nice, clean data feed that you can load into the warehouse. So there are some options around tag management systems that in some respects can help you duplicate what you're doing without necessarily the implications of a data feed. For some people, direct applications insert is really attractive. If you have a transaction-based website, chances are that as users move through the website, they're communicating with a back-end database, they're doing specific actions, you're feeding information back to them. You have an opportunity from those systems to just write directly into an analytics mark what's happening. We certainly have clients that do that. There are some challenges with direct application insert. While it can be a great and extraordinarily clean and powerful insight into transactional processes, oftentimes, in fact, the vast majority of times, it doesn't let you know what else the customer did. It doesn't give you insight into their behavior prior to the transactional data stream. That's a pretty big challenge. In most cases, what we find is that people are sourcing a warehouse from direct applications insert. They're still missing very significant types of customer behavior, and they're still looking for ways to source that customer behavior into the warehouse as well. And then lastly, the solution we're really going to dive down into in some detail in today's webinar, the Celebris solution, but there are some dedicated infrastructure solutions, solutions designed specifically to collect information and move it into the warehouse. So as you think about those things, I wanted to talk first about the data feed, because the data feed is the single most common option. It's really the default option. You know, when we talk to clients and they think about building an analytics mart, pretty much 90% of them right off the bat think data feed from web analytics. And frankly, this is the way the vast majority of data marts that we've worked on have actually been implemented. There are some good reasons for that. If you use a data feed from your web analytics tool, you get a clean data stream. Tagging's pretty nice for that. It does a good job of providing a clean data stream, at least provided you have decent governance around your tags. In addition, you know, you've already made that pretty significant investment in customizing the tag. You've already captured a bunch of custom variables. All that information is going off to your web analytics vendor. So not only do you get robust variable collection in the data feed, but it's also consistent with your web analytics vendors. And at the enterprise level, consistency sure counts, so that's pretty important. The third thing is that a data feed is often incrementally very inexpensive. You may be paying a fair amount for your web analytics solution, but a lot of times the data feed is bundled in that contract or only a small additional cost. So if you've already got the web analytics solution, incrementally it looks very inexpensive to add a data feed. And then lastly, there's no additional tagging. So that all looks pretty good. I think, you know, in a lot of ways it's perfectly understandable why this is the most common way to source a warehouse. But I have some reasons for thinking maybe it's not the best choice, and that's what I'm going to dive down into now, because I'm not convinced that for everybody, at least, taking a data feed from their web analytics solution is the right way to source a data warehouse. So let's talk about some of the issues. And some of these things are things that I've already touched on relative to issues with tagging. If you are going to source your data warehouse from your web analytics data feed, then clearly one thing you've done is actually added yet another source of friction in terms of ability to change vendors, ability to switch technologies on the web analytics side. It's difficult already to switch technologies. You have all the costs of changing your tag. You have all the costs of changing your reporting. Well, what you're going to add to that is all the costs of changing your warehouse ETLs and data feeds into your warehouse. Those are significant costs. So in effect, you're building friction into the system. I think the other thing that I would emphasize here, and this goes a little bit back to my discussion of what's the role of the web analytics solution. If you believe that the web analytics solution has a significant role in your organization for democratizing data, for providing people with that frontline support for data, then this may not be a very big issue for you. On the other hand, if you think that most of the interesting reporting is going to come out of the mart, out of the warehouse, out of the integration of customer and web data, then I can tell you web analytics solutions are a pretty expensive way to collect data. So not only are you committing to the vendor, you're really committing to an ongoing expense that's more about software that maybe you're not really taking full advantage of. So I think there are definitely some issues around this, that people need to think about. Issue number 2. Now, tagging's great in a lot of respects, but I think we've all come to realize in the last few years that it's a lot more challenging than we thought. I talked about what I think is probably the single biggest problem with tagging, which is that the pressure it puts on the organization to get the implementation right up front. I think there are some other issues, though, with page tags that I want to talk about. They do require significant customization. If you've ever done a real web analytics implementation, you realize it's a lot more than dropping a single line of code onto each page. To really take advantage of the systems these days, you have to do a lot of page level and link level customizations. That's hard work, and it makes the governance challenge harder. It also leads to the next bullet point here. Web analytics tags can be pretty heavy on the page. You know, these a lot of times aren't really light tags. The more you customize, the more logic you're putting on the page, the heavier the web analytics tag gets, and the more page impact it can have. And this is becoming a pretty serious issue for a lot of our enterprise clients. And then this last one, I think I've probably talked about enough already. They really do present a significant governance challenge because you're having to front load the measurement, because there's a lot of customization, because the tag is not something that your IT folks necessarily deal with on an ongoing basis. It is really hard to maintain governance on tagging. I think that's a point that probably, if you guys are out there on the enterprise side, you've been through the wars on this, you know it's a lot harder than it looks. I know from our experience, one of our most common engagements at Semphonic is to come out and help people fix their web analytics tagging infrastructure. That's something we do over and over and over again, to the point where it's actually kind of frustrating. And I think that for organizations that have been through the mill on this, they realize that it's not enough just to get it right once. You have to have processes in place, you have to have governance in place, you have to work at it constantly because your website is constantly changing. You're constantly adding things, you're doing new functionality. Things are changing out there, and the tags have to adapt, or what started out as maybe a pretty good implementation over a couple months or half a year suddenly isn't so great an implementation. So there are some real challenges to the whole tagging governance and the way it works. There's a third issue, I think, a third pretty big challenge around web analytics as the source of your data warehouse and using a data feed. This may seem a little unfair, but the thing about web analytics data is when you get a data feed, it's really a transport mechanism. It's a giant flat file. It's every single server call that was sent off to your web analytics vendor with hundreds of columns of data about that. It's not meant to be a data model. It's not. And so in one sense, when I complain about the fact that a web analytics data feed doesn't provide a data model, you might say, well, of course not. It's just a transport mechanism. But the thing is that building a data model around web analytics data turns out to be pretty hard. Web analytics data has not reached the state of maturity where people really understand how to take it and model it in the warehouse. And that's true across the whole range of technologies that are available to people. I don't care whether you're using Hadoop or you're using a Teza box or using a Teradata system. In every case, one of the most important things you have to do is figure out how to integrate the customer data with the digital data and how to make sense of that digital data. That takes a lot of work, and it's probably the single most common failure point I see for enterprises who are proceeding down the data mart path. So the fact that from the web analytics data feed you get no help on this, that is not the web analytics vendor's fault. They're not supposed to be providing you that. But it is a significant stumbling block. And I think people need to recognize that as you take that data feed and you use that as the source for the mart, you're leaving yourself a significant amount of IT work and a significant amount of risk in the process of building the mart. Last one, number 4. This is the last of my big challenges and the reasons why I have some reservations about a data feed as the source for the mart. When you take a data feed from a web analytics vendor, you introduce pretty significant latency into the feed into your warehouse. Most data feeds come at the end of the day, so that the data you're collecting generally represents anything from a few hours old to 24 hours old. Well, from an analytics perspective, that's not a very big deal. You know, people don't really do much analysis on a real-time basis. So you might look at that and say, you know, I don't need real-time data to build my models. But there are some things that you do need real-time data for. I believe in our client base, the single, probably biggest goal that when I go out and talk to marketing executives, what they tell me is they want to dramatically improve the relevance of their digital conversations with people. How do you do that? Segmentation and modeling of customer behavior and integration of that into their digital real-time experiences. When someone arrives on your website, you need to decide how you're going to talk with them. When you send out an email after someone leaves your website, you need to know how you're going to talk to them. And you need to know that in something either at or very near real time. So if you've introduced significant latency into your warehouse, you've essentially foreclosed those opportunities from that technology stack. Doesn't mean you can't go off and build a real-time technology stack, but you've left yourself a really big real-time problem, a problem that you are really not closing the gap on at all in terms of your analytics smart and your data feed efforts. So from my perspective, there really are a whole set of key issues that people need to think about as they think about sourcing from the warehouse. They need to think about, well, do I want to be committed to a web analytics vendor, and do I want to pay the expense of a web analytics tool? I think the answer to that is going to be different for a lot of different organizations. I don't believe there is one right answer to that. They need to think about the governance process around tagging and how difficult it is to get really robust data collection for the warehouse. They need to think about the challenges of building a data model from the digital data and whether there are easier ways to get to that. And they need to think about what they're going to do about real-time going forward. Is real-time maybe something that you're willing to put on the back burner? Well, that might be true. You know, as I look at today's enterprise, I'm finding that a lot of clients are thinking, well, real-time's hard, and real-time is hard. Maybe I'll put that off for a little bit. But we all know how that goes. You're investing when you build an analytics smart in a pretty major technology stack. You're putting a lot of investment in that. And to find out a year or two down the road that one of the core capabilities that you really want to use to drive your marketing isn't going to be available from that, that could be a bad decision. So that's really something I want people to think about as they think about the web analytics infrastructure, not only what's right now for your needs right now, but what do you need to do to really support yourself and your marketing efforts over the next couple of years. So that brings me to the Celebris solution. In the white paper that this webinar is based on, I talked a fair amount around how the Celebris solution really addresses each of the issues that I've talked about so far. It's a really interesting technology. It's something that I've been working with these guys since before they were Celebris. They used to be called SpeedTrap. Have introduced them to some of our U.S. clients, and I really think it's an interesting and a technology that fills a niche that maybe until pretty recently people didn't even know they needed. But I think it's really slick. And some of the things that I believe are really important that people should understand about it. First of all, it is an easy single tag deployment. So Celebris works in some respects like other tags. However, there are some fundamental differences, and this really gets to the next bullet point here. Celebris tag does a really rich job of data collection. It collects significantly more out of the box than web analytics tags do. Functions almost, but not quite, like a clicktail tag. It captures a lot, a very exhaustive set of user interactions on the website. That makes the job of doing a Celebris implementation a lot easier. You don't have to put nearly as much effort into pre-planning the data capture. So in a way, the Celebris tag, okay, in some ways it's just like a tag management solution, but in some ways it solves a different set of problems, because instead of giving you a nice UI to configure a custom tag, what it does is a very aggressive job of data collection so that you're able to collect all the information that you're probably going to need without any kind of customization. And I think that fundamentally changes a lot of the thinking people have around tagging and how it works. The third thing that Celebris gives you is a rich out-of-the-box data model. I've already talked about how important I think this is. Building a data model in an analytics mart is just critical to the success of that mart. I have seen effort after effort fail because people took the raw data from the website, dumped it into an analytics mart, and then gave people access to it, and nobody knew what to do with it. It's hard. It's challenging. That web analytics data it's just not easy to work with. Celebras has built a pretty darn nice data model that's fed directly from the tagging. So the data flows directly into warehouse structures where your analysts and marketers can start to work with it in a much more productive fashion. I think this significantly shortens the time to real benefit. And certainly, God, I know how this goes. From a marketing perspective, one of the scariest things about building a data warehouse is how long it can take to get the benefit. You know, it's a much bigger project than we're used to. It takes us out of that comfort zone of software as a service and tagging where really quickly we see value back. So anything that shortens the time to value and the time to benefit, anything that shortens the time where your organization starts to see real results from an effort like this, I think is a really good thing. By the way, I'll mention here too, on my own hook, Semphonic, we just released a white paper about how we extend the digital data model. And if you're interested in these topics, I definitely urge you to go out to our website, semphonic.com. Go check out the white papers, and you can see some of our thoughts on how to extend a digital data warehouse model and how to really make it productive, and not just to track web, but to track a whole variety of sources from across digital, from mobile and even social stuff. So I think if you're interested in this topic, I think you'll enjoy that white paper as well. And then the last bullet point that I wanted to talk about with Celebras is that they provide, and I think this is really novel, unique, and important, deep support for a real-time technology stack. Not only do they provide pretty low latency around the basic collection, but they have some separate tools that are really designed to extract the key information from the real-time behavior of customers and allow you to take advantage of that on your website for personalization. I really believe that this is the direction that enterprises want to and need to get to do really effective marketing. And the fact that this is a technology stack that from the ground up has been pretty carefully thought through to support real-time is, I believe, one of the most significant aspects of it. It may not be something that you're looking at today, but it's really important that it supports that for the future. So thank heavens, you can probably tell here, my voice is going. 2 webinars may be a little too much for my scratchy throat. So at this point, I'm really happy to introduce James Perkins from Shop Direct. James and Shop Direct have been customers of Celebras, and one of the reasons we wanted to have them on this webinar is that when we put the white paper out, a lot of people came back to me, and I think the most frequent reaction I got was, I hear what you're saying about tagging. I hear what you're saying about the data warehouse. This is high up on our list. I think what you're saying about a data feed is pretty thought-provoking and interesting. I'm just not sure about the Celebras technology. How real is it? How robust is it? Celebras is a UK-based company. They've been around for a while, but I think most of us here in the US aren't deeply familiar with them. So we thought maybe instead of showing a demo of the product or just talking about those things, it really made sense to have a customer come on and talk about their experiences. I think that's a little more real and a little more practical. So James, I'm going to kick it over to you right now to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about Shop Direct, particularly for the U.S. audience here who may not be as familiar with you guys.
Thanks, Gary. Okay, so starting with myself, I've been with Shop Direct Group for about 17 years, and within data analysis and targeting roles for 16 of those years. Currently, I'm the new data and technology manager, and I work with the customer targeting function to identify, test, and implement new data and technology opportunities to drive incremental performance from the customer contact strategy. So Shop Direct itself, we are a remote retailer based in the UK, mainly dealing in catalogues and online. Titles include within the UK, Littlewoods, Very, Isme, K&Co and Woolworths. We are also international. We have a Littlewoods brand in Ireland, Littlewoods brand in Europe, and recently launched Very.com, offering UK fashion to 48 countries, including the States. So feel free to have a browse on that site. In terms of size, we, on average, take about £1.7 billion in sales per annum. On the web, we're averaging 500,000 sessions per day, with about 9 million page views generated per day. Now, over the last 10 years or so, we've successfully evolved from being a traditional mail order retailer based around catalogues and postal and telephone response, which we're now generating over 70% of our sales online. And what we've seen recently is a significant uplift in the amount of sales coming through mobile devices. From a data perspective, we've always had the opportunity to capture data. Obviously, customers have to tell us who they are, what they want, what credit terms they want, etc., as they interact with our business. Now, that's been very good for us because we've been able to utilize that data to build ourselves a core competency in making informed targeting decisions through advanced modeling techniques, which we'd use to target our direct mail, our contact center calls, and also our catalogs and leaflets, etc. So that's where Shop Direct is.
Cool, James. Well, thanks. That's great. And I think the thing I want to emphasize is that this is e-commerce on a large scale. And I think that's important because I know from my perspective, and I'm sure everyone else has seen this, sometimes you hear about case studies and you hear about clients, and they're just not at a scale that necessarily makes it interesting. You guys do pretty darn serious, pretty huge e-commerce, and I think that's really important. So let's talk a little bit about how you got into the Celebris solution. I mean, I think this is obviously a pretty big new technology direction. You guys have been doing it for a while. I'd like to hear a little bit about what your thinking was. What were the challenges? What were the problems that drove you to go in this direction?
No problem at all. So coming from a customer targeting perspective, we faced a number of challenges around becoming an online retailer compared to where we've been in terms of a postal retailer. In fact, there's some pretty significant challenges which we were facing. The first one is that we had a new shop window. Now, previously, we would have controlled who we'd send a catalogue to or any customer recruitment activity to. We would have carefully selected those individuals and based around our experience, those that were more likely to respond to the offer. As the internet comes along, of course, anyone can come and have a look around our store. It's online, and the problem then is we don't know who's looking at what and what the issues are on the site, and specifically of our customers that we're sending paper to, how many are actually visiting our website or are they using the catalogs themselves. So just as visitors can come and find their offering, our customers can go outside and look at our competitors' offerings as well. Pretty easy within a few clicks, as I'm sure everybody does. So we needed to understand what was important to our customers. We need to create a site that is relevant for individual customers, hopefully to improve our relationship with them and improve our retention rates and our sales rates, etc. Another advantage of the web for us is that we can now carry a lot more lines of product. For example, we can sell extended ranges to those that we put on paper, extended ranges of white goods, TVs, electricals, even clothes, extended ranges, and particularly around the fast fashion lines, we were operating on a 6-month catalogue basis, where we can now buy fashion and get it loaded up to the website and get it into the customer's awareness pretty much straight away. But that's all very well. But especially on the fast fashion, aside from sales volumes, we have no idea really which customers are finding the product and whether they're actually interested or not to judge whether that was a good buy or not. And also digital channels that came along with the web, they provide new channels to markets. We've got email potential, we've got targeted content on the website potential. So it's very tempting just to give all the customers the same message, because again, email is relatively low cost. So broadcast emails, mass marketing, our concern was that the right approach? Just because it's cheap, should we actually do it, or should we actually respond to a customer want and need and treat them as individuals rather than as a mass segment? So we found that traditional web analytics tools would help with some of those answers, but the majority of the data to form the answers will be too aggregated in those tools. We'd like to understand the individual. We'd like to understand the individual in relation to which mailings we've sent them, which catalogs we've sent them, which telephone calls we've made, how they've called us, etc. So getting to that individual granular level of data was very important for us. We also found that tagging the site in the traditional tools, they were time-consuming, costly, and limits exactly what you can capture, as Gary's already alluded to earlier. And that was blocking the imaginative questions that were being asked in the business. We couldn't answer them. And also we found data structures didn't enable us to join our on and offline data together, including things like what individuals were entering into forms, search boxes, so what products were they interested in that we don't sell, that kind of thing, and more importantly, who exactly that was. And we weren't able to join behavior together over time. So if we saw a customer over a period of 6 months, a year, 2 years, we wanted to be able to join all their web experiences together. So see, were they moving in terms of their life stage? Were they showing signs of getting married, having children, etc.? And also, when we're thinking about abandoned baskets, we need to understand whether customers are using the web as a research channel and sticking something in a basket just to keep it there until they remember to telephone and make the order, or whether it was genuinely abandoned or they were returning online later. So quite a few questions, and what we couldn't do was answer most of those, to be fair. And the issue was down to the fact that we didn't have the data at the right level in the right place. So we thought there must be huge benefit from removing that wall between the traditional web analytics tool and the corporate database, which in our case was Teradata. And we also felt as if to future-proof ourselves, we would need real-time data so that we could adapt and learn and progress and become more real-time as things move on. And that's really where Celebris came in.
James, I think you touched on a lot of things that I think are really important. We had a listener question in that I think in many respects your answer gets to, but I wanted to call it out explicitly. The question really was, please give us an example of the type of question or issue addressed by customer-level data that most web analytics solutions don't provide. And I think you touched on a fair number of those, things like whether a customer is increasing or decreasing in their interest, what kind of things a customer is interested in, when a customer is interested in new stuff as opposed to the stuff they've been looking at all along. Those are things that's actually pretty darn difficult to figure out from a web analytics solution. Are there some other thoughts from your perspective, some obvious examples? I think you probably touched on a goodly number, but that was a question that came in that I thought might be worth just addressing in the context right here. Other aspects of the data that from a customer analytics perspective aren't available to you, but that you guys have really found to be really important.
Yes, so certainly within the information that customers enter into forms, if you see a particular customer getting to a certain point of the site and having problems, they don't proceed beyond that, you can actually look at what they were entering into those forms at that time and see, is there a pattern building, and are there other customers that are experiencing that same issue? If so, then you can go and address that issue. You can go and contact the customer because you know what they've done. All that is really anything to do with the customer that you can think of, you can do with this data.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, well, let's talk about, you touched on this just a little bit, but obviously this is a big deal. I think I've mentioned repeatedly how challenging organizations have come to find tagging and governance. Celebris is a tag-based solution. I'd really like to talk a little bit about your implementation experience, the challenges, what you found to be good, what you found to be bad. I know from our conversations that really it was a pretty darn good experience, all things considered. But if you could take a little time and give people a sense of the implementation as you found it and what worked well for you and what didn't.
Sure. Naturally, we were quite nervous, as seems to be the trend, that this technology would deliver exactly what it said would do on the tin. So to answer that question, we took part in a proof of concept on one of our brands. It was a short proof of concept, and it was delivered very, very effectively. So in conjunction with our database, Celebris came on site, and within, basically, once the insert had been put onto our site, which involved a small amount of work from our e-com developers just to get that insert live, the data started flowing through into the warehouse straight away. So within 2 weeks, we'd been able to analyze what we could see in that data, and we found a few customer-facing campaigns that we could deploy immediately and gauge the uplift that we could obtain. So I think it was an 8-week proof of concept overall. At the end of the 8 weeks, we'd confirmed a number of key facts that we needed to establish to be able to move forward. One was that Celebris does in fact capture every visitor, that it does capture every click, so we can see exactly what things people are clicking on within the site. It captures every page view and every interaction on that page view as well. So if they're looking at stock position and that generates a hover box, then that will be captured. If they're looking at different sizes, all that information is coming through. And that's coming through in pretty much real time into us. And the lack of tagging was absolutely fantastic. Once that insert had been put on the page, everything we wanted was coming through all the time. So at the end of that proof of concept, we'd established that this technology could really pay for itself. And so we went into a full implementation. In that experience, we've worked out that it's pretty impossible to break this tool. We've tried our best, and really we can't do it. And again, that full implementation required very little internal effort. Celebris provided most of the effort along with our database partner, Teradata. And where we did have issues, it was our interpretation of our website or the data that was a fault. It was sort of our lack of understanding about the data that was coming through. It was completely new to us. So again, Celebris were very helpful, clarified what the data meant, and during that we also found numerous opportunities to use the data in ways we'd never even thought of, but obvious when you look at the data.
James, there are two issues around implementation that have come up in user questions that I wanted to address. One is, obviously, one of the unique aspects of the Celebris tag is how rich it is in terms of the collection, but that always creates a worry, too. A lot of our enterprise clients are very sensitive about page load times. Web analytics tags tend to be heavier than most other tags they put on the site, and heaven knows they're already putting a lot of other tags on the site. What was your experience with page load times and the Celebris impact on what you guys were doing? Did you look at that?
Yeah, we certainly did. That was a big concern within the e-commerce area. When the tag went live, there was absolutely no difference in page load times. It made no discernible difference at all, and still hasn't to this day. Yeah, we've seen other tags do cause problems in page load times. I'm sure everybody's seen that, but the Celebris one has never caused us an issue in page load. It's almost as if it's not there.
That's great. Let me ask you a second question, because this is also, I think, a concern, and I think maybe a more challenging one. Obviously, one difference here is that right off the bat, you're collecting lots of user interactions. Some of them are meaningful, some of them aren't. A lot of data is kind of getting dumped in front of the analyst. How hard was it for your analyst to sort of figure out what to do with this data and how to find the key events and how to focus on the right stuff? Was that a challenge for you guys?
It was certainly a challenge. Because the data is coming through pretty much live, we encourage the analyst to go and do things on the website and then look at the data stream that came through. That was a very important learning point for our analysts, because then they could relate the data pieces they were seeing to what they've done. And we'd encourage them to take screenshots as they went through and then tie it all back. And that proved very, very useful. Our view on the amount of data that's coming through is that we don't know what we don't know. We want to ask. But we keep finding things that we can answer. People keep asking questions. Can Celebris tell us this? Can Celebris tell us that? The answer is always yes. So we're constantly finding new questions, whereas if we'd have to go and tag everything that we're interested in, we'd still not be able to answer all those questions. And we have to go and re-tag everything.
Cool. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about your sort of initial strategies for usage. I believe that a very daunting stage of adapting to an analytics mart is what you do first, how you get people started using it. You guys had, from my perspective, an exceptionally fruitful initial phase for actually using the tool. I'd like you to talk a little bit about just how you found adoption, how you encouraged adoption. I think to tell the story a little bit for people, but then comment a little bit about why you think it was so successful on your guys' end in terms of really getting people effectively using the tool to drive benefits to the organization.
Fine. Well, during the proof of concept, we established a method of communicating with the rest of the business, which was effectively taking a single customer, just a random session, having a look, seeing was there anything interesting in it, and then what could we do on the back of it. So it was always the so what we were answering. And those were one slide examples of a customer does this, we can do this, and then this will happen kind of examples. And that really got people's imagination going. The second thing, as we moved towards the full implementation, was that we got together groups of people from across the different marketing teams, across the different brands, across the different business units, across the company as a whole, really. Got them together, went through these customer examples and said, this is the kind of information that we'll be able to get in a couple of weeks. What should we do next? And they came up with a list. You know, you saw the light switching on in people's minds. As soon as they were seeing these customer examples, they, right, this is really good stuff. We can really move forward as a business with this information. From those working groups, we picked out some key examples of where we think we could add value quite quickly. So, for example, abandoned basket emails, we were able to go and make sure that the customer hadn't subsequently bought that product. We felt that was a bad customer experience if we email someone about something they've already bought. And there were numerous examples such as that, and it really got the whole business talking about the Celebrus product, all the data we were getting through, and that was even before we'd gone live with our full implementation. So having had everyone on board, we were able to get all the other teams that we needed aligned to be able to produce the emails, produce all the creative, produce all the text, etc., so that we could respond quickly once the data started flowing through. So I think that was really the key momentum builder, and to be honest, we're still doing that even now. 18 months, 2 years down the line, we're still having those conversations. Look at this thing that we've just seen, what could you do with that? So we made it very inclusive as a business. It wasn't a targeting tool, it was a company tool. And in terms of structure, we didn't actually bring in any additional resource to do any of this either data mining or production. It was all using existing resource that was just sort of marginally redeployed. Job role profiles were marginally tweaked to take on the web data into them. And we felt that was very important so that we used existing people's knowledge and understanding about how the business works and how our customer communications work, just to take a different slant on things.
James, you talked a little bit this morning. I thought we had a really interesting discussion around how to some extent it almost changed your view of what kind of analyst you needed around this tool. And I'd like to touch a little bit on that, but also maybe talk a little bit about contrasting that experience of analysts getting involved in using the data to the experiences you had with web analytics tools. I mean, I assume that it's been pretty different in terms of the way people have grappled with the tool and found uses for it. What's your sense of that?
It is a completely different beast to traditional web analytics tool. It's more of a marketing analyst or risk analysts or merchandise analyst kind of tool, to be honest. And the reason for that is that they can quickly and easily see how they can link all of the web data into the customer segmentations we have, into the profit segmentations we have, into the customer contacts we've sent out. They're using it to build statistical models. They've just taken it and using it as they would a purchase record or a risk record or a contact plan record. Any of that is really just become part of the day-to-day job. And that's the real benefit of taking experienced marketing analysts or risk analysts and embedding it within their workload, so they can relate it to the business as a whole.
You know, you've almost talked about this next question, but are there other things, as you guys went past pilot and you built up this program really successfully, are there other things about building the program that you think are worth touching on, things that work particularly effectively for you guys in terms of getting more usage out of this kind of data and this kind of tool?
Sure. It's opening up to other areas of the business to say, what could you do with it? You know, one real success has been able to link multivariate testing on web pages to the customer and then subsequently to what they then did later on. So you can understand the full P&L impact of a web test. That was a huge benefit for us, and that's now standard in any of our testing.
I think that's a huge point, and you know, you mentioned that this morning. I didn't get a chance to comment on it, but I think that a lot of the multivariate testing we see our clients do, this is a pet peeve of mine actually, just isn't very interesting. You know, it's testing minor creative variations, and I think that the really interesting testing gets when you can start to really segment your customer base and understand the real impact of tests on customers over a significant period of time. I think for a lot of e-commerce shops, that's just really critically important to doing effective testing.
It is, and you know, there's many examples of different areas of the business saying, oh, if we could do this and we could save some money or we could drive more demand. There's lots and lots of those examples within our business of people just having a little bit of imagination and was going, yeah, we can tell you that now because the data's there, the URLs are there, everything's there.
That's cool. Well, okay, we're getting near the top of the hour. Before I open up, there's a bunch of audience questions. I'm going to try to tackle some of them. And I'll say right up front, if we don't get a chance to tackle your question, we'll send out a personal reply to everybody. I'll reiterate what I said earlier. The webinar is being recorded. We're actually going to have 2 recordings. You could choose to listen to the UK version or the US version, whichever one you prefer. I think they've both been really good. But you'll get an email that gives you a link to the recording, so that'll be available to you. We will personally answer all the questions. And frequently on my blog, I also post a compendium of thoughts relative to the questions. But James, I had one last question I wanted you to deal with. You know, my feeling is a lot of times you see a presentation, everybody's telling you what's great, everybody's telling you how wonderful they did things. Nobody ever tells you the struggles. We all know that every project, every technology has struggles, things that doesn't do so well, things that turned out to be harder than you thought. I'd appreciate it if you just talk a little bit about some of the stumbling points, some of the things that you guys found either harder than you expected, or some of the places where you just couldn't get done what you needed to get done, or you had to do more work. I think for our audience, that's some of the most interesting stuff, and I think it's good for people to go into any new technology consideration with their eyes really open about what the challenges are going to be.
Of course, yeah. The first thing I'd say is that we weren't expecting our website to be as fluid as it is in terms of changing, and we just didn't appreciate that fact. So we've had to engage a lot more with the e-com development team to understand what changes they're going to be putting in. If they change a page name because they're quite rightly improving the site, we need to know if there's a form on that we're interested in. If they're changing, putting in new functionality, then quite often we need to understand how the customer's reacting to that. So again, we need to be engaged early on. It's just building those relationships that we wouldn't traditionally have had, not having dealt with web data in our day-to-day job. And we've made significant strides in that area. Also, the volume of data, it means that analysts need to change the way in which they work. They've been used to a consistent volume of data. We've now given them a lot more. And performing deep analytics or modeling on the web data, they've had to do a lot more planning, a lot more sort of aggregation to get it into the level at which they need for that particular piece of work. The value is definitely being able to take the granular web data and either use it in that form or aggregate it in a way that's applicable to the particular task in hand. But they've had to learn new or implement existing skills in a different way to be able to do all of that work. But what I would say is that the value that's driven out of this data is significantly more than any other pain. It far outweighs that.
Cool. Okay. Well, we got just a couple minutes. I'm going to try to tackle 1 or 2 of the audience questions. So here's one that I thought was pretty interesting. Did you guys implement Celebrus internally, or did you have them host the solution? And can you talk a little bit to the IT effort you had to make, both maybe around implementation and then on an ongoing effort to support the system?
Okay. We implemented it internally. I'm not an expert on servers, etc., so I won't go down that road. It's all hosted within our estate, and it's very little effort to maintain. If we want to capture or define a new goal, I do that from my desktop, and I'm not an IT expert by any means. I can configure the interface to pass that goal through very quickly. For example, if I want to know every time that something happens on the site, I can do that myself. In terms of database management, it just falls within the normal database management team, and the servers are managed by the server team. It's as simple as that. There's very little to do in terms of management.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one last question. One pretty interesting question that came in, and if this is more technical than you want to get, let me know, and I can take a crack at it too. But the question really is, without the explicit nature of traditional web analytics tagging, how does the data model allow you to understand some actions? And the example given was like JS overlays. And I guess I'd be curious from your experience whether there are types of actions in various channels, be they mobile apps, be they on the website with JS overlays, HTML, Flash, whatever, where you guys have found that tag capture doesn't do the things you want, or that you have to do more work than you expected.
And we found the odd thing. There's the odd thing in our previous versions of our sites that we have to put a a JavaScript calling, but there's nothing serious, and they've been very easily overcome. And as we've rolled out onto mobiles, onto tablets, etc., all that data is just flowing through as it would off a desktop site. And the beauty is that because we know who's logging in on the site, we can tie their desktop behavior with their mobile behavior and their other behavior. So haven't yet to find anything that I can't get easily.
Terrific. Well, we've reached the top of the hour. I want to pause here to just thank everybody for joining us. James, I want to thank you particularly for saving my voice, because I think around the half-hour mark, I felt like I had said about as much as I could say. And as always, we really appreciate people joining. Thanks for the great questions. There's actually a ton of questions we didn't get to, some really interesting ones. We will respond to those. So, James, any last words?
I honestly recommend doing this. It's been the best thing that I've ever seen come through, to be honest, in terms of return on investment anyway.
That's fantastic. And I got to say, too, I like the technology a lot as well, and I think that what I really want people to take away from the webinar is at least to be thinking about, what are the alternatives, and looking at the future and thinking about the appropriate technology stack for your business. I think there's a lot of different decisions that people can make here, but my sense is that maybe a lot of enterprises are going down a path without necessarily thinking through the full implications of whether it's going to be where they want to be a year or two from now. So thanks again, everybody. It's been a pleasure doing this. I know I've enjoyed it. I'm sure James has too. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.